Hello and welcome to my channel. Subscribe, share and like our videos if you find them interesting. Here is a story about how a Nigerian prostitute's life took an unexpected turn. My name is Amaka and I have been selling my body on the streets of Lagos for as long as I can remember. My mother was also a prostitute, stuck in this hopeless cycle of using her body just to barely survive. She got pregnant with me when she was just 15 after having sex with a customer. She died giving birth to me, leaving me an orphan in this harsh world. I was passed around between extended relatives as a child, but no one wanted the burden of another mouth to feed permanently. So by age 12 I was tossed out onto the streets with nowhere to go. Some older street girls took me under their wing, teaching me how to attract men who would pay to have their way with me. It was dangerous and degrading, but I did what I must to stay alive. By 15 I had my own usual spot on a crowded corner, wearing tight and tiny clothing to entice customers. Some men were rough and violent. I was occasionally beaten if I asked him to wear a condom. The police also routinely rounded up us street girls, threw us in overcrowded jails for days without food, and forced us to pay huge bribes to be released. When I was 17, I got a tiny rented room in the red light district so I no longer had to sleep on the streets. The volatile pimps in the area constantly harassed me to work for them instead of freelancing. One night a pimp slashed my face with a razor for refusing him, leaving me a permanent scar as a reminder. As the years passed, my spirit and youthful beauty started to slowly fade away in this endlessly harsh life. By 25 my usual corner was now populated by younger girls, so customers were harder to get. Often I had to accept just 1,000 or 2,000 naira for my services, barely enough to eat that day. I wanted to escape this life, but I knew nothing else. My lack of education and skills trapped me here just like my mother and countless fellow Nigerian girls. We were the forgotten, the expendables, the throwaways that nobody cared about. Then one evening, a well-dressed man called me over to his shiny SUV. Something about him seemed different than my usual customers. He politely asked my name and took interest in my life story. I cautiously revealed some details, though wary of why this stranger suddenly cared. When I quoted my rate for my services, he gently declined. Instead, he asked if I would simply join him for a proper dinner at a restaurant. In my many years hustling on the streets, no customer had ever offered such a thing or treated me with basic human decency. I hesitantly agreed, overcome by curiosity about his motives. Over dinner he introduced himself as Dele, a businessman recently returned from abroad. He apologized sincerely for the hardships I had faced since childhood. He spoke of wants to help girls like me to have better options instead of selling bodies to survive. Even more surprisingly, he never once made any advances on me sexually, when I clearly had expected otherwise. After that night, Dele stayed in touch and soon proposed an offer I never imagined possible. He wished to pay for my education, rent an apartment for me, provide basic living expenses, and help me find a respectable job once I completed vocational classes. In exchange he asked for nothing at all from me, only the chance to help me restore dignity and purpose to my life. His random act of kindness seemed unreal, but eventually I accepted. I politely parted ways with my regular corner clients, many of whom surprisingly wished me well in my new chapter. I found decent clothing, cleaned up my personal habits, and focused intensely on my classes and job opportunities ahead. I vowed to never look back or take this second chance for granted. Within 2 years, I had credentials as an administrative assistant. Dele helped me get hired at a marketing firm where I quickly advanced from clerk to executive secretary. For the first time, I enjoyed financial independence without relying on flesh peddling for some abusive pimp or dangerous customer. I reveled in simple pleasures like reading novels and watching old films, things only privileged people had time for when I was endlessly hustling before. I will never forget Dele and how one compassionate stranger listening and wanting to help pivoted my entire destiny. Perhaps more astonishing was that he never once tried to get sexual favors in return. His selfless actions helped me go from being trapped in an exploitative life on society's bottom rung to living and working with dignity, pride, and purpose. I made sure to pay his kindness forward whenever possible. I volunteered nights at a shelter for vulnerable girls fleeing abuse, trafficking, and prostitution, wanting to help the next generation avoid my previous fate. I donated to orphanages so more unwanted children had a fighting chance rather than ending up discarded on the streets. After 5 years working at the firm, I had risen up to an executive management role overseeing operations for our entire region, an unthinkable outcome as a former street girl. But most rewarding was using my influence, network, and income to support empowerment initiatives helping impoverished mothers, trafficking survivors, homeless youths, incarcerated women, orphans, and young sex workers break free from exploitation. So though my unpromising start dealt me a dreadful hand, through serendipity and redemption I somehow ended up with more purpose and joy than I could have envisioned for myself. Everything I now had, education, career, home, community respect, I wanted to pour back so other marginalized girls might uplift themselves too. My mother's life was cruelly cut short and she never got to experience being cherished as the precious human being she inherently was. But sometimes I feel her spirit cheering me on, proud that despite the odds her daughter went from being an invisible street girl to an agent of positive change for many helpless women and girls following in her tragic footsteps. I don't know what ultimately made Dele show random kindness to me that night which altered my entire life trajectory. But I do know that I will never stop extending support to lift up those still trapped on the edges of society who desperately need hope and opportunity to transform their fates too. My dream is to run a full shelter and vocational center someday to welcome more women left behind by destiny, helping rewrite their stories forever.